haven't written an essay before, which you very likely have, then you've at least read, and if not, then at least heard of the essay. But did you know that the very form of the essay that we know so well today emerges from grief, specifically the death of a best friend? I'm Dr. Ellie Anderson, co-host of Overthink Podcast, and I'm here with my Overthink co-host, Dr. David Pena-Guzman, to talk a little bit about Michel de Montaigne's essay of friendship, which indeed reveals the origins of the essay as well as much about the nature of friendship.
And grief.
And grief, indeed. So I want to situate this a little bit, and I know some of you have also probably seen my video that is about Montaigne and Derrida on friendship, where I articulate some of these ideas that I'm going to spell out here. If not, check it out, and as well as checking out, while we're at it, check out Overthink wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we have, videos here on YouTube as well. So Montaigne had this friend, Etienne de la Boétie, who was his, indeed, best friend, who died at the very young age of 33. A little too close to home, let's say.
Well, we already passed that line.
I didn't.
Oh my gosh, I did.
Depends on when you're viewing this. Anyway, on the very first page of the essay, Montaigne refers to borrowing from his friend, de la Boétie. And Montaigne's friendship with Etienne de la Boétie begins and ends in writing. They were first introduced to each other through their written works. And then at the end of his life, La Boétie bequeaths his library and papers to Montaigne. In this sense, the death of the friend is related to literature, right? But so is the very beginning of their friendship. And Montaigne says that he invents the essay as a response to the death of his friend. So Michel de Montaigne is indeed the inventor of the essay. He's writing in French. Essai in French means attempt as well. And so the essay are a series of attempts, right, to articulate ideas on various subjects. And you might wonder then, how does the essay emerge through the death of his friend? The short answer is that when he could no longer write letters to his best friend, Montaigne began writing essays. And so I think that already raises questions about who is the addressee of the essay? Is the reader of the essay taking the place of the dead friend? Is Montaigne, in writing these essays, befriending himself? Is he friends with all of the writers he cites? Because one of the things you see in Montaigne's essays is very frequent references to other texts, most often, but not always, ancient texts.
Yeah. Lots of Greek and Roman quotations.
The dude loves Horace.
Yes. And so you do have this interconnection between philosophizing, learning to die, learning to live, and the role of friendship in the good life that I think makes for a really fascinating reading, especially with this genre innovation. And when people read Montaigne as a philosopher, some people just read him as a sort of as a literary writer. And when people read him in a specifically philosophical context, the things that usually stand out are, of course, the content of the many essays he wrote. There's like on friendship, on sorrow, on. Can you look at the table of index? Just like.
Oh yeah, but I also just wanted to show the bulk
size.
of it.
Yes.
If you're reading Montaigne in English, we recommend the Frame translation.
Yes.
Of books, of cruelty, of thumbs.
Of thumbs.
Of anger, of virtue, of repentance, of diversion, of physiognomy, of experience. Oh, a classic. Anyway, simple.
And so the essays, one of the important things about them as a genre is that they allow you to explore philosophical ideas without having to unify them into a master work. There is no logic. There are no relations of logical dependence between the essays. The essays, and again, this is where the term ambiguity, the ambiguity of the French term, essay, comes in. They're just giving it a shot,
like standalone episodes of TV rather than a narrative TV show.
Yeah, and it also means to experiment to some extent, to try something new.
Totally.
And so there's an element of novelty that happens here and of innovation through writing and through expressing ideas.
Which I would briefly say is, I think, what we do on the podcast.
We try really hard.
No, there are attempts. Like,
Yes,
there's
yes,
these standalone episodes, because our topics, I mean, our topics are pretty similar. One of his essays is on anger. We have an episode on rage, right?
Yes.
We're kind of dabbling in these things, citing a lot of other people in them, and
Yes.
trying on different ideas.
The new Montaignes of the contemporary world. Come on.
Okay, next. Tell me what you think about this friendship idea.
So Montaigne is one of the best thinkers on friendship, because it colors the totality of his work.
Mm-hmm.
And in chapter 27, we're working here with the actual book and then photocopies of
Well, it's
of the
28
essay.
in mine. I don't think the chapter
Oh.
matters, right? Because it's, like you said, it's just standalone. It's
Yeah,
just
of course.
essays,
No,
so.
yeah. And also mine, I read it in French for a change. And I think you have the English version here. So in French, it's called Sur l'amitié, so
Yeah.
about friendship or on friendship.
Yeah, I
And-
mean, it's of, you
Yeah.
translate that into English as of. But
What was your question?
Not sur in general, but when you're talking about, like, these titles of essays. I just wanted to know what you thought of this, of friendship.
Oh,
but,
friendship
but
in general.
specifically, no, I mean, perhaps, like, some of the things that I was laying out a moment ago.
So things that stand out for me about the essay have to do with Montaigne's claims that just cover the beginning of the essay, that friendship is actually quite difficult to attain, and that many forms of social bonds are incompatible with friendship. And so he is trying in this essay to figure out what would be required for what he sometimes refers to as like a perfect or a complete friendship or a pure friendship
Drawing,
almost.
in that sense, from Aristotle.
Drawing from Aristotle, so as to figure out under what circumstances a friendship can flourish and what social conventions actually prevent it from flourishing or even from taking root in the first place.
Yeah, and any thoughts on like La Boétie and the death of the friend that I mentioned before we launch into the theory that he develops here?
No, I think maybe that can come out once we jump into it. The one thing that I will want to return to down the road in this discussion is that the death of the friend, in this case of Etienne de la Boétie, what is important about that death is that it's the death of a particular individual. And I read the essays as commentaries on the limits of classical universalism. So when you think about what defines Greek and Roman philosophy, is that it often works with universals. And one way of articulating what is novel about Montaigne and the intervention that he makes in the Renaissance and the early modern period, sort of at the edge there, is that it's a newfound appreciation for the value of individuality and forming the self.
Okay.
And you see that in this relationship to a particular one other person whose death becomes then a catastrophe and also a catalyst for writing.
So this question of selfhood and individuality gets us to what has fascinated me most about this essay for a very long time, which is how the particular relation of friendship troubles the nature and boundaries of the self. Montaigne writes of complete friendship as a fusion between self and others. He writes about how in friendship, souls mingle together completely. He describes La Boétie as myself. He writes, he is myself. He treats friendship as communal. True friends share property, share wills, share thoughts, share judgments, share family.
They share women, no?
Honor and life. Well, it says family. I can't remember if he says women.
No, he says
specifically.
femme in the French.
Okay.
Which I actually marked it because I was like,
or
ooh.
wives. Yeah.
No, let me get it.
Which is kind of funny too, because some people have seen, for reasons that we'll talk about in a moment, La Boétie and Montaigne as probably having been lovers. And yeah, I mean, I'm not in a position to speculate upon that because I'm not a historian, but I will say I think that speaks to the particular philosophy of friendship that he puts forth here, partly because fusion, this complete fusion, is something that we tend to associate with romantic love and not with friendship. Montaigne's theory of friendship sounds very odd to the contemporary ear. He talks about it as one soul in two bodies and the complete fusion of wills.
Yes. So, one comment about that. Here he says, and I'm translating from the French on the spot, And because in effect, everything about us we share in common: desires, thoughts, judgments, material goods, women, honor, and life.
Well, and if it's femme, it would be wives.
Yes,
right.
And so
In
there's
this context.
there's a sense that the union of souls implies the union of everything that is associated with the person.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was funny that it obviously includes wives because it points to a different model. What I think was common in the Renaissance. And but I don't know enough about that period and norms around marriage. And so I don't know to what extent that would be echoing something that's already in the cultural space, the notion that best friends would share everything to the point of sharing wives, or whether that's sort of him raising the bar of friendship.
Well, if we have any historians watching this, you can let us know, because I don't know the empirical answer to that either. I think, though, what we see in this is a picture of friendship that, as I mentioned, is much more similar to romantic love than what we usually think about as friendship. And one of the peculiar things about this is that Montaigne is a monogamist about friendship. He says that you can only have one complete friendship, which is actually something that Aristotle suggests as well, so it's not totally original here. But one of the things that he says with respect to this is that if you had two complete friends, and they were both in a time of need, who would you run to? There has to be some priority there. And that priority speaks to the fact that there's really only one person that you value above all others.
Yeah, and it also has to do with the finitude, or not the finitude in the sense of death, but the finality, the limitedness of the self. Because he says, this example of friendship is excellent. And when it comes to speaking about the plurality of friends, the reality is that a perfect friendship is indivisible, because in a perfect friendship, you give everything to the other to the point that there is nothing left to give. And so there's a sense here that you wouldn't have, if you had anything else to give to another friend, it would mean that your relationship to the first friend was imperfect and incomplete.
Yeah.
Right. So you exhaust yourself in the other in friendship.
Well, and this is what leads to the very bizarre, almost like numbers of the selves here, because Montaigne writes that in this complete fusion, the two selves blend, they merge, and they become one. He writes, "In the friendship I speak of, our souls mingle and blend with each other so completely that they efface the seam that joined them and cannot find it again." So there's this oneness between them. And yet when La Boétie dies, Montaigne says that he goes from being, what is it? The line about the half. I should know this because
The line about the half.
Yeah, no more than half or something like that. I should really know this because my former mentor, Geoffrey Bennington, has a book that is titled this, that is about Derrida, but playing on this notion of Montaigne. It might be in a different essay, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So let's maybe we'll leave that aside. I think that might be in this is in my other video on Montaigne and Derrida, so maybe I'll just leave that because I'm not going to be able to successfully reproduce it here. But what happens in this fusing of souls is that after La Boétie dies, Montaigne is left alone. And he doesn't go from being this larger self to this just smaller self. He actually feels as though he is reduced in a really fundamental way. But suddenly you do get the sense that he and La Boétie are not a whole, right? They're not fused because one of them has been able to die before the other.
Yeah, so they become, it's almost like a holy duality, like a version of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
Where it's like 2 in 1, 1 in 2.
Yes.
Or like the Musketeers, like all for one for the two of them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the numerical approach to the self here wouldn't be particularly helpful, I don't think, in terms of thinking, is there one or is there two, but rather that in their relation with a pure friend or with an absolute friend, you cease losing your individuality in the sense of seeing yourself as apart from them in all the things that matter for life. And so that's one thing about the essay that, to be honest, is not my favorite about his conception of friendship. This fusional conception.
I'm not a big fan of fusion approaches to love, regardless of what kind of love it is.
Yeah, and that also leads him sometimes to also use the language of predestination when thinking about friendship, where he says there is this inexplicable force that drew us together, almost as if the universe knew that we belong to each other.
Okay.
And he says this is due to destiny.
Yeah.
Because somehow reality or God or whatever knows that these two perfect souls will enrich each other's lives only in their interaction.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's balanced, or actually there's a contrast sometimes between this language of destiny that he has, like, oh, this was meant to happen, this could not have been otherwise, with occasional references to the fact that they met by chance and how beautiful that is. So there's a tension here between chance and necessity that it strikes me as fascinating, but I would have to think more about what it leads me to think about his theory of friendship.
Sure. Yeah, I like the numbers here. I think they're interesting because he talks about, for instance, in that context of saying that the friendship is indivisible, each one gives himself so wholly to his friend that he has nothing left to distribute elsewhere, as you mentioned before. On the contrary, he is sorry that he is not double, triple, or quadruple, and that he has not several souls and several wills. But I think here, I want to go back to that quote that I mentioned before. Oh gosh, where was this? Which is about the souls mingling and blending with one another. Because this is where you get what is probably the most famous line in the essay, and either way, it's quite interesting. If you press me to tell why I loved him, I feel that this cannot be expressed except by answering, because it was he, because it was I. Yes. Because it was he, because it was I. This is an early articulation of what in contemporary philosophy of love is known as the no reasons view, which is the idea that if asked why you love somebody, you can't say, oh, because like, he's handsome. Now it looks like now people are going to think we're dating, which people already
I know people have been saying that. It's fine.
Unless you listen to the podcast, you will probably know very quickly that we are not indeed dating. We have just been friends for a very long time. Anyway,
perfect friends, fusional friends, romantic friends in the Renaissance tradition.
For sure, not fusional friends. But if I were to say, oh, because David is so handsome, David is so smart, etc., you're likely to be like, well, no, that doesn't feel good, and you probably don't really love me if you're collecting these qualities and saying that's why I love you, because in principle, anybody else who shares those qualities would be equally loved by you. There's something specific, and to go back to your point earlier about individuality, that is important here.
Well, and so I underlined this line underneath it. Also because I think it captures the essence of this essay. And this goes to what I said earlier.
Did you speak it in French, actually?
Yeah, parce que c'était lui, parce que c'était moi.
Yeah, but it's in the old French where moi is spelled M-O-Y, right?
No.
Oh, you've got a modernized version here.
Yeah. And
because he wrote it in Old French, so okay.
No, I've tried to read the original, and it's impossible.
I had to in grad school. It was so hard. Anyway, go ahead.
And actually, Montaigne was my first class in graduate school. My first semester, I took a class from Montaigne. No, and
Hartle. Yeah, we had the luck to go to a graduate school that had two amazing Montaigne experts. Yeah.
And this phrase, parce que c'était lui, parce que c'était moi, because it was him, because it was me. I like how you framed it as the no reasons view, but I sort of read it against the history of philosophy up until this point, especially classical philosophy.
Okay.
And he's in close interaction with Aristotle throughout the essays. And one of the things about Greek philosophy and also Roman philosophy is that it seeks universals, or at least it seeks categories that unify particulars.
Okay.
Whether that's Plato's forms or Aristotelian forms, whatever the case might be. There is always this sense that what philosophy does is it draws our attention to the universal. And with Montaigne, especially around the time of the Renaissance, you get this shift where suddenly you find particulars for which there is no universal. And once you have a particular without universal, it means that there are no laws or principles that you could go out looking for in order to explain it. And so here, here we have not just a veneration of the individual, but we actually have a critique of a certain way of doing philosophy that only looks for those broader categories, using friendship as a counterexample. If you're looking for generalities, friendship will remain a mystery to you because it's just not that sort of thing.
And there's a nice corroboration of your point here in the very next line, which is beyond all my understanding.
Yes.
And he says in multiple places in the essay that their friendship had no other model than itself. It cannot be compared.
You're like taking the phrases out of my mind
out
of my mouth.
As friends, we agree on what are the most interesting points.
And you said that we were not fusional.
And La Boétie cannot be compared with anyone else either. I like your point about Aristotle, though, because I tend to read Montaigne as kind of doing an updated version of Aristotle's theory of friendship. And I do think in many ways that is true, specifically the complete friendship. He also, like Aristotle, doesn't think friendships of utility are true friendships. A little bit of a complicated question in Aristotle, what is a true friendship? Like, because friendships of utility he does describe as friendships. But anyway, that is not the main purpose here. But I do think you're right in as much as for Aristotle, complete friendships can only be had by excellent people. You have to be morally righteous in order to be able to have a complete friendship. And I don't think that's totally opposed to what Montaigne is saying here, but I do think you're right that there's a different view, which is just really a singularity that's not dependent on excellence.
Yeah, because so he's very insistent that Etienne de la Boétie is excellent.
Exactly.
He's the
so
best.
That's why it's maybe
he's like a law-abiding citizen who
Yeah.
has never even hurt a fly.
Yeah.
But where he differs from Aristotle is that Aristotle will lay out a rule or a principle, which is that between excellence, friendship can flourish.
Yeah.
And I think Montaigne would recoil at the idea that he could have had this kind of friendship with any other excellent law-abiding citizen that was not Etienne de la Boétie. Because, again, that notion of radical individuality, of predestination, and of absolute fusion just wouldn't apply. Like, it's only him. It's because it was him.
Okay, we don't need to dwell on this, but I did find the citation I was looking for earlier about the half thing. I am correcting myself with my former Jeffrey Bennington student is now proud of myself again. Okay, he writes that I was already so formed and accustomed to being a second self everywhere that only half of me seems to be alive now. So there's this very bizarre mathematics at work where he says on the one hand, our souls merged into one. On the other hand, he says, I was a second self, right? I was doubled by being with La Boétie. And, now only half of me seems to be alive now. Don't need to dwell on that. Just wanted to mention it. I'm really curious what you think about his comparison of friendship with other forms of relationships. Do you want me to remind us of some of the distinctions?
And parenting? Okay.
Maybe I'll lay out some of those distinctions and we can get your thoughts on them. Okay. He thinks that friendship is different from parent-child relationships because those are too unequal. Imbalance of power, endemic to the parent and child relationships. He thinks it's different from familial relationships between brothers. To be more gender neutral, we could say siblings.
Yeah.
And he thinks that siblings might have totally different dispositions. And so they're drawn together not because of a likeness in their disposition, unlike friends. This friendship is different from love, by which, he presumably means like an erotic love, because in this kind of love, there is too much bitterness and intensity. Love can turn into a friendship, Montaigne thinks, but friendship itself is a harmony as opposed to an intensity that involves a bitterness. It's different from marriage because marriage, and this very much speaks to Montaigne's historical period in which love and marriage did not go together necessarily. Marriage is a bargain. He throws in this idea that women can't be good friends, which is messed up, sad, wrong. And then he also says that this friendship is different from, quote, pederasty, so a homosexual relationship between men.
With an age gap.
With an age gap, yeah, exactly.
So it's like Greek.
That's what I was about to say.
Yes.
Yeah, that had an age gap.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. This was the model of love between men in ancient Greek.
Can be friends with your daddy.
And he says that this is because in pederastic relationships, there's a difference in ages as well as in functions. There's not a lot of reciprocity.
Yes. Which is interesting because we also find halfway into the essay on friendship that Etienne de la Boétie is significantly older than Montaigne. And so it's like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Especially if there are reasons to suspect, as some people do, that they had a romantic sexual relationship.
Yeah. And I feel like the sexual relationship component is something that would have to be verified or not verified historically. I don't have any knowledge about that. But I will say from a romantic standpoint, this essay predates the development of romantic love as we know it. And so from the perspective of a philosopher of love who's really interested in the history of love, I kind of feel like the idea that, well, they were in love, it's just a little bit anachronistic. I'm not saying they weren't. I think his view of friendship is very much what we would now consider romantic love.
But I think for him, let's assume that there was a sexual relationship just for a hot second.
Okay.
I think the difference for him has to be the basis on which the union is made, because he says the problem with the Greek model of pederasty is that the attraction was always bodily, superficial, and rooted in beauty, and the young boy sort of would be like no longer appealing once they lost their beauty.
Yeah.
And he is very clear that what drew them to one another was the purity of their soul.
Yeah.
That they could see like the benevolence or the goodness in each other's heart. So he has all these things that he says about not just that they're different, that friendship is different from marriage or from parenting, but that those things are incompatible. Like fundamentally incompatible with friendship.
Kind of friendship. Yeah.
The references to women were very bizarre. He seems to believe that there is something in women's temporal nature that makes them fickle and makes them wishy-washy. And that kind of changeability and what's another term for like fast changing?
Caprice.
Or like caprice, that capriciousness makes also friendship incompatible. Do you have other thoughts, or can I ask a question?
Yeah, maybe we can end with this question.
Well, it's not a question. It's actually an example that he uses that I really loved. Okay. And then I guess the question is, what do you think about that?
Sure.
So about 3/4 into, or 2/3 into the essay, paragraph 18.
I know. I wish we had the same page numbers.
Yeah.
Hey, we're making it work.
So this is where he talks about
before or after the quote by Terence. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh wow!
I'm just kidding. Go for it. Just go for it. I'll find it. It's a short essay.
Let me see what. It's after the quote by Cicero.
Okay.
Number 20.
Yes, and hopefully you can always follow along with us on this, preferably in frame translation, but doesn't need to be necessarily. Okay. Anyway.
So he gives this example from the Roman period of two buddies.
Okay.
And he gives a reading of their friendship. The two people are Tiberius Gracchus, who was a Roman consulate, and Caius Blosius. Their story, he says, is told in more detail by Plutarch. And these are two friends who were involved in a controversy where one of them got accused of treason.
Okay. I have literally no annotations in this paragraph, so I'm just going to listen to you.
Okay, so two friends, Tiberius and Caius.
Yeah.
One of them is accused of treason and trying to undermine the government. And so he's put on trial, and they bring the friend as a sort of character witness to the proceedings, and they ask him, what do you think about this guy? Is he trustworthy? And being his best friend, he says, you know, he is solid, he is my rock, I give my backing to this guy because I believe in his goodness as his friend. So a model of kind of pure friendship between two individuals. And the people holding the proceedings then say, really, if you think he's so good, what would you have done if he had asked you to join him in the plot to overthrow the government? Now, the expectation is that the guy will be like, oh, well, I wouldn't have done it, because I am a law-abiding citizen. And instead, the guy says, I would have done it. Mm-hmm. I would have joined in this plot against the government. And Montaigne says, this answer was deeply misunderstood by the people who were listening to his testimony, because it doesn't mean that he had a desire to overthrow the government or even that he would have done it, but rather that he knows this person so well that he knows that the possibility that he would do something wrong is so outside of the realm of possibility that he feels absolutely confident saying that in case that had ever happened, he would have sacrificed himself and done something that goes against everything that he believes in. Okay. That's how deeply he believes in the friendship. And so there is this paradox in this example for Montaigne where the friendship leads to a kind of claim that others cannot understand. And it's because they're not part of that relationship. Okay. Only the two of them really understand each other.
I mean, it sounds kind of like when you give your friend the benefit of the doubt when they tell you something crappy that happened at work with another coworker, and you're like, you must have been in the right. You know, this presumption that your friend is the one in the right. I feel like friendship does, result in that. I mean, I wonder whether that anecdote puts pressure on our earlier suggestion that Montaigne's theory of friendship doesn't depend on the goodness of the friend, because it does seem like...
It does depend on the goodness of the friend.
Oh.
I think he says at some point, no, you can only be friends with good people of a good heart. That's
Wait, where does he say that? That goes against what we said earlier. I'm not surprised by that, but it also makes me rethink,
because he says
my earlier suggestion that maybe he's farther than Aristotle than I thought. Mm-hmm. I was kind of convinced by your claim there.
Yeah, but
we definitely hold on. We need to find that, because we said earlier that we don't think that Montaigne's theory of friendship depends on the goodness of the friend, right? Because it's so singular.
No, but the friend, I think at some point, I wish I had marked it. He says that if you cannot be friends with somebody who asks you to do bad things.
Okay.
But I honestly didn't mark it, and I won't find it. And this is in French, which I'm slower at reading than English.
Okay. Well, I'm committed to finding it, because I don't want us to be... even if we're essaying interpretations here, if there's something within the short span of this 10-page essay that contradicts something we put forth, then we should correct it.
I don't think that contradicts.
Yeah,
I think it's a requirement that they be good.
It contradicts what we put forth earlier, because I said... You said that was when we were talking about the singularity, right? Because it was he, because it was I. And you said this is very different from Aristotle's view of friendship, because it's not universal, it's about the particularity. And I said, okay, so maybe he's a little bit more different from Aristotle than I thought, because Aristotle requires that excellent people are friends.
Yes.
And it seems like Montaigne isn't. But maybe Montaigne actually does think that excellent people are friends. So we need to find this out. Meanwhile, people in the comments are like, oh! No.
So we're probably going to pause this and come back in like a few seconds.
As we find the reference. We think we found the place. You would think that it would be easier to find it in a 10-page essay. But yeah, so he says that for, this kind of friendship that he's seeking, it is necessary that all the springs of action be perfectly clean and true. What is it in the French?
Where is it? Right above the Terence quote. Is it the first Terence quote?
I don't know.
It's actually the only Terence quote.
Terence gets one and only one
quotation. Let me see. How does the paragraph begin?
Whereas Horace gets
how does
a ton.
The paragraph begin?
In the relationships.
In the relationships that do not have a goal.
But it's the end of that.
Okay.
Okay. Oh wait, no, it's before. It's just before that.
Oh, okay. 272. Where am I? My pages are getting turned around. We're gonna see this one then. Okay, here we go. Here we go. It says.
Yeah. Okay. It must be that all of the springs, the
yes.
resort, yeah, are
Yeah.
perfectly clear and sûr. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, perfectly clear and true or sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there is a sense here that the friend must have a purity of heart and of motivation.
Yeah.
Or rather what at the time was called the will. Like the springs of action.
Yeah. Well, and let me say that the reason for that, according to Montaigne, is because this friendship is a fusion. So he goes on to say, in the relationships which bind us only by one small part, we need only look out for the imperfections that particularly concern that part. The religion of my doctor or my lawyer cannot matter. So like, it doesn't matter. The lawyer, I'm just relating to in their capacity as lawyer, whereas the friend I'm relating to in all capacities. So I do think he's closer to Aristotle than we believed. You're seeing here on air like the actual development of interpretations of this essay.
Yes.
We're leaving this, in the full development of thought. This ended up becoming a performative essay.
Trying to figure out the meaning of this essay.
We by no means have had a chance to cover all of the richness of this short essay, which we hope you will check out on your own if you haven't already, if you're reading along with us or have read it in the past. Yeah, we hope this has been, I don't know, at least interesting. And there's so many wonderful scholars working on Montaigne. And so check out other secondary literature if you haven't yet as well. As always, we are Overthink Podcast. You can listen to us wherever you find your podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel here.